Each time prices increase, you surrender a little more of your freedom. Month after month, groceries, rent, and gas all creep higher. If you've ever felt your paycheck doesn't go as far as it once did, you aren't imagining it. You are witnessing the quietest transfer of wealth in human history, one that repeats every generation. Because inflation doesn't just make things cost more, it reshapes who owns the future. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever quite as simple as it seems. To most people, inflation feels like chaos, prices spinning out of control, savings slowly eroding, the system slipping away. But to the powerful, inflation represents order. It's how the modern economy sustains itself. It's how governments fund wars without hiking taxes. It's how corporations wipe away their debts, and how the wealthy see their assets grow while everyone else struggles just to keep pace. So the real question isn't why inflation occurs. It's why it's permitted to happen, again and again. To understand that, you have to return to an era when inflation was treated like a national emergency, not an economic target. In the early 20th century, most major economies were linked to gold. Every paper note was backed by metal stored in a vault. That kept money scarce and stable. It also meant governments couldn't simply print their way out of mistakes. If you ran a deficit, you either raised taxes or admitted defeat. Inflation, when it did happen, was usually the result of war or collapse, a loss of discipline. The idea that a government might deliberately choose inflation would have been unthinkable, but then everything broke apart. The Great Depression of the 1930s shattered the illusion of monetary restraint. Prices plunged. Wages collapsed. Banks failed. The economy froze, not from inflation, but from deflation. When money gained value over time, nobody spent it. Debt grew heavier by the day. It was an economic death spiral, and it changed forever how policymakers thought about money. By the end of World War II, inflation had shifted from a fear to a tool. Governments emerged from the war buried under mountains of debt, some owing more than 200% of their GDP. They couldn't pay it back honestly. So they didn't. They let inflation do the work. Through the 1950s and 60s, global debt quietly shrank. Not because nations grew richer, but because the value of their debt melted away. $1 trillion in war bonds didn't mean the same thing a decade later. The system learned a lesson: moderate inflation could solve impossible problems without anyone even noticing. Then came 1971. President Nixon closed the gold window, ending the dollar's convertibility to gold. It was supposed to be temporary. It became permanent. And in that moment, money ceased to be a measure of value and became an instrument of policy. For the first time in modern history, the world's dominant currency wasn't backed by metal, but by confidence. You could no longer exchange it for gold, only for more dollars. Inflation was no longer a symptom. It was a design feature. From that point on, the rules of the game changed. Money could be created in unlimited quantities, so long as people kept believing in it. Governments could borrow without restraint. Banks could endlessly expand credit. And investors came to realize that as long as inflation remained managed, the real winners weren't the savers. They were the borrowers. Because inflation quietly reverses the logic of money. If you hold cash, inflation steals from you. If you hold debt, it pays you. Every year that prices increase, the real value of what you owe declines. $1 million mortgage today might feel overwhelming. But in 20 years, after steady inflation, that same debt feels far lighter. Meanwhile, your assets, your house, your stocks, your land, all rise in nominal value. Inflation doesn't merely shrink debt. It amplifies wealth. That's the paradox at the core of the system. The same force that impoverishes the poor sustains the rich. And it's not a conspiracy. It's arithmetic. Inflation is the mechanism that allows a debt-based economy to survive. Without it, every dollar owed would need to be repaid in dollars holding the same value as when they were borrowed. An impossible task when the system itself is built on expanding credit. So, governments, central banks, and corporations quietly agreed, it's better to let the currency lose a little value each year than to let the entire system collapse. But what happens to the average person within this arrangement? The answer is both simple and devastating. Wages rarely keep pace. Prices rise faster than paychecks. Savings, once the cornerstone of middle-class security, become a slow-motion loss. And the people who can't afford to own assets, who live on earned income rather than capital, find themselves on an invisible treadmill that never stops, because inflation rewards ownership, not labor. And it punishes caution. It turns thrift, once a virtue, into a liability. The system tells you to save, but penalizes you for doing it. When your bank offers you 3% interest, but inflation runs at 6%, you're not earning. You're paying just to keep your money still. Meanwhile, those who borrow at 4% to buy property watch their asset values climb by double digits. That's not market luck. That's by design. Inflation doesn't redistribute money randomly. It redistributes it upward. The people closest to the source of new money, banks, governments, corporations, get it first, while it still holds its full value. By the time it circulates to you, it's already diluted. This is called the Cantillon effect, named for an 18th-century economist who noted the pattern 300 years ago. When new money enters the system, it benefits whoever receives it earliest, before prices adjust. Back then, it was kings and merchants. Today, it's hedge funds and central banks. Inflation doesn't just change prices, it changes who gets to live above them. After 1971, the logic of money was permanently flipped. What once punished overspending now rewarded it. What once disciplined governments now liberated them. And as credit replaced savings, inflation became the quiet glue holding everything together. By the 1980s and 1990s, the system had perfected its balance. Central banks promised price stability, targeting roughly 2% inflation, just enough to keep the economy expanding without the public noticing the silent tax. 2% sounds harmless, almost clinical. But over a generation, it cuts the purchasing power of a dollar in half. The difference is, while ordinary people watch their grocery bills double, the rich watch their assets double, too. And then some. Steady inflation makes debt predictable. The rich don't fear inflation, they own it. They own the appreciating houses, the businesses raising prices, the stocks adjusting upward. They own the debt that gets cheaper to repay each year. Inflation is their silent co-conspirator, a business partner that magnifies every advantage. Governments love it, too. The longer inflation persists, the smaller public debt becomes in real terms. That's why they'll fight deflation with everything they have. Deflation exposes fragility. It makes debt heavier, reveals bubbles, and forces defaults. Inflation does the opposite. It hides the cracks, fills the gaps, and quietly transfers pain down the pyramid. The bankers, they love inflation most of all, because it guarantees a world that can't stop borrowing. If prices are always rising, saving is irrational. You have to invest. You have to chase yield. And every chase means another loan, another product, another derivative. The entire architecture of modern finance, from mortgages to bonds to stock buybacks, relies on one assumption, that tomorrow's money will be worth just a little less than today's. The problem is, the further down you are in that system, the less control you have over it. When you live on wages, your income adjusts slower than inflation. When you live on assets, your wealth adjusts faster. And when you live on debt, inflation either crushes you or makes you rich, depending on what kind of debt you hold. A credit card balance is poison. A fixed-rate mortgage is leverage. The rich know the difference. Most people don't. That's how inflation turns knowledge itself into capital. Then came 2008. The global financial crisis should have been a reset, a moment to rebuild something honest. Instead, it became a masterclass in controlled inflation. Central banks created trillions in new money to rescue the system. Not by handing it to citizens, but by pumping it into banks and financial markets. Asset prices recovered overnight. Stocks and property soared. Wages did not. Quantitative easing, the technical term for printing money through bond purchases, made it sound like a technical fix. It wasn't. It was a historic redistribution of wealth through asset inflation. Those who owned thrived. Those who rented waited. It wasn't corruption. It was policy. Then in 2020, the cycle repeated, this time under a global pandemic. Governments injected money directly into households to avoid collapse. Demand exploded while supply chains broke. Inflation surged higher than it had in 40 years. And once again, history rhymed. The stock market hit record highs. Real estate became unaffordable. And the same people who benefited from low interest rates now profited from scarcity itself. For a moment, the public thought inflation was back because of greedy corporations. But that greed wasn't new. The same greed that the system had rewarded for decades was at play. They were just better at playing the game. Because inflation doesn't choose winners. It simply amplifies whoever already holds leverage. Look at any major inflationary period in history, the pattern repeats. In Weimar Germany, the middle class lost everything while industrialists holding real assets emerged richer than ever. In post-war Britain, inflation quietly wiped out the national debt while savers watched their pensions erode. In 1970s America, stocks stagnated, but real estate and commodities built fortunes for those who could afford them. And in the 2020s, the richest 1% gained trillions while the median household fell behind. Different eras, the same formula. Inflation is the oldest wealth transfer on earth and the most respectable one. The public blames greed, politics, supply chains, but those are symptoms. The root cause is structural. We built an economy that depends on credit expansion. And credit expansion needs inflation to survive. The alternative isn't stability, it's collapse. That's why even when central banks talk tough about fighting inflation, their real mission is never to eliminate it, only to control it. To make it feel like stability while the currency quietly erodes beneath your feet. Because if inflation truly fell to zero, growth would stop, the machine would seize. So the war on inflation becomes a performance, a delicate dance between credibility and necessity. The Federal Reserve raises rates, markets panic, and then, just before something breaks, the tide turns. Because deep down, everyone at the top knows a little inflation is a small price to pay to keep the illusion alive. But there's something deeper than policy here, something psychological. Inflation doesn't just change numbers, it changes behavior. It teaches people to consume now rather than plan later. It punishes patience. It rewards risk. It turns saving into fear and speculation into hope. In doing so, it creates the perfect citizen for a debt-driven system, always spending, never satisfied, perpetually chasing a security that can never quite be caught. That's how inflation becomes a culture. We call it growth. We call it prosperity. But underneath, it's the same mechanism that's been running for centuries, a quiet cycle of devaluation, reinflation, and rediscovery. It keeps empires solvent, banks liquid, and the public docile. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, because inflation isn't random. It's how power measures time. It rewards those who live in the future, the ones who borrow, invest, and manipulate the flow of credit. It punishes those who live in the present, the ones who earn, save, and spend what they have. And it forgets those who live in the past, the ones who still believe money holds its value. That's why the rich love inflation and you don't. Because to them, it's not theft, it's strategy. Every generation learns the same painful truth: the value of money is never fixed. The only question is whether you're the one losing it or the one deciding what it's worth. Inflation didn't appear out of nowhere. It's the natural consequence of a world that wants everything now and pays for it later. It's the quiet engine of debt, the fuel of empires, the lifeblood of a system that must always expand, even at the cost of the people inside it. And yet, here's the paradox: without it, everything collapses. Deflation destroys borrowers, crashes banks, and freezes trade. Inflation keeps the gears turning, no matter who gets crushed in between. That's the moral equation of the modern economy: growth at any price. So the next time you hear that a little inflation is good for the economy, remember who it's good for. Not the worker saving for a house, not the retiree living on a fixed income, but the ones who already own the house, the ones who built the system to make sure it never stops rising. Inflation isn't a glitch in capitalism. It is capitalism, running at full speed uphill with your wallet in its pocket. Because in the end, inflation isn't the fire, it's the oxygen. And the world we built can't breathe without it. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers.